yourself, and then I'll go.
Sure, be happy to. Hello, everyone. Nice to virtually meet everyone on the call. My name is Eric Bannon. I'm Vice President of Regulatory and Clinical Affairs for AlvaMed. Excited to present our information today on U.S. regulatory post-market. By way of background, I work with a consulting company called AlvaMed. We're a smaller, about 20-25 people company working in quality assurance as well as regulatory affairs here in the U.S. as well as in the EU. And we also do clinical affairs, so CRO for smaller trials to support many startup companies. So I look forward to hearing your questions and your comments about today's presentation. Thanks, Martha.
Okay, thanks. And I want to introduce myself. I am Martha Russell. As Layla has said, I have over 20 years experience in medical devices in pre-market, post-market. I think I've done almost everything in regulatory. I recently joined AlvaMed. I've been at AlvaMed for about 6 months, but really happy to share our experience and looking forward to the great discussion and all the questions today. So let's get started. So this is on U.S. regulatory post-market. So for this, you went through your development of your product, you did your submission to the FDA, and you were lucky enough to get clearance. So now you're out in the market, your device is out in the market. Now what do you do? So there's a couple items here for us to focus on. So here's the agenda. We're going to go through quality system, registration and listing, some import requirements, how to assess change, and then finally post-market safety monitoring. So let's start out with a quality system. If you developed your product, it should, yes?
Sorry to interrupt you. It would be great if you could share the presentation in full screen mode.
I'm going to be switching back and forth with the internet, and it was a little weird last time. So
good. Great.
I'm going to try this, but thank you. So when you designed your product, hopefully it was under a quality system. So the QMS, it manages all aspects as it states here, design, manufacturing, supplier quality. So depending on the class of your product, class 2 and class 3 are higher risk products, and they would require more of a stringent QMS than class 1. So the idea of the quality system is a little different for US versus EU. I think for the EU, the QMS is required before you commercialize. That's part of your CE marking and your technical file. In the US, depending on the class, it might be required prior to the commercialization. Now, Eric, check me, make sure I got that right. Did I say
that's
that
right,
Eric? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's interesting because it is a little bit different, and I know some folks kind of struggle with that concept, but really when you submit to the FDA, oftentimes it's earlier in your development process. In other words, most of the submissions to the US, you have some data to support that submission. Oftentimes it's not clinical data. And you're able to kind of do it earlier on in your process. And the FDA is not necessarily concerned with your quality management system. They're concerned just with your product and that particular submission. They then, after you actually, we'll talk a little bit about registering your facility and registering, listing your device. That's the key for them, or the cue to them to say, okay, now they're in our database. Now we need to consider them for quality management system. And they generally do that through the auditing process, right? Periodic audits. I don't know if you added any slides in our presentation on FDA inspection. We could talk about that maybe in a couple of slides, but that's the difference. Whereas in the EU, you're required to get a 13485 certificate first, then put together your technical documentation for the notified body. It gets reviewed, and then you get your CE mark. So there's a fundamental difference between processes here.
Yeah, I didn't add any slides per se. I just thought we would talk to it.
Yeah, let's go through this next slide. We could maybe just talk about kind of the compliance side.
Yeah, so here's, on the left, you can see here, it's a kind of a representation of what a quality management system kind of is. And I'm not going to go through each step, but you are required to maintain and implement your quality system. So there's, in the US, we have the quality system regulation, which is 820. And outside of the US, they kind of lean on 13485. These two are very similar, with the exception in the US with the adverse event reporting, which we'll be going through at the end of the presentation. So, your QMS needs to be maintained, and part of the maintenance is to be audited. So there's a couple different ways for auditing to occur. You can have a notified body come in, somebody that would maintain your 13485 certificate. A foreign government might come and audit, like Brazil loves to come and audit if you're planning on going outside the US. Russia loves to come and audit when they have time. FDA certainly will come and audit your processes. There are a couple harmonization task force that help to harmonize and kind of lessen the burden on the manufacturers. So some of you might have heard of Mdsapp, Medical Device Single Audit Program. That is kind of meant to harmonize Canada, Australia, Brazil, Japan, and I think the US. I think there's 5. There might be one more that I can't remember right now.
You're right. There are 5, Martha.
There's 5.
And there's a couple of
Okay.
Others that are kind of affiliate members, if you will. I'm not quite sure what that means, but Korea's in that list. Singapore and Argentina are on that list as well.
Yeah. So they're, to harmonize globally is, I think they try to do it, and it's just so difficult. I think it's a goal. Hopefully someday we'll see a global audit program that will suffice everywhere. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say for that one. Eric, did I leave anything out?
No, I'm just going to comment quickly on the whole audit compliance aspect here, because generally the FDA has let's call it a risk-based approach, right? They will try to audit manufacturers, let's say, on a cycle of every 3 to 5 years, right? Usually those audits are pre-announced, right? So they'll contact whoever the representative is. They'll let you know that they're coming in for a routine, GMP inspection. They'll set up the date. They'll come in. Oftentimes they'll spend 2 or 3 days and give you a report. However, there are times you can also choose to use this MDSAP program, which the FDA will recognize, in which case you'll do one audit periodically, I think every 5 years or so, and you can use that for routine purposes. The other important point, I think, for the group to understand is that the FDA will also complete for cause audits, right? So you have a routine GMP, everything's fine, no problem. If you, for example, have a recall or a correction, certain types of recalls will sometimes bring the FDA to your facility. If you have, we'll talk about medical device reports for adverse events for devices in a couple of minutes. If you have a adverse event report, issue, they'll sometimes show up for that. And the last way that they'll contact you or potentially inspect you is for through an industry complaint. Right. So that's where other companies kind of say, hey, I saw this company, let's say at a trade show, and they were marketing for this indication. They're not cleared for that indication. And I've actually been involved with that in some of the companies that I've worked with, where you had to bring the FDA through that type of issue. So I think it's just important that from an inspection standpoint, it's probably beyond our scope here, that the FDA does routinely do those programs. The output of those inspections are what's called the 483, where you get a list of observations of which you have to respond, or if you are truly non-compliant, they give you a warning letter. That's the kind of an issue that you need to formally respond. Your submissions to the FDA get put on hold, etc. So if anyone in the group has questions more specific to this, send them on over. You'll get our emails and whatever at the end of the presentation. Feel free to reach out and we'll help you out with those.
Okay, great, thanks. Are there any questions to follow on with that? Or any questions about quality management systems?
I do not see questions in the chat so far.
Okay. Well, if you have any, feel free to put it in the chat and we can address it maybe at the end of next session or at the end of this presentation. So registration and listing. Let's see. So when you register and list, you're actually giving the FDA. The FDA is alerted as to the manufacturing locations that you're using and what medical devices and maybe some processes that are being performed at the locations. It usually means that you're kind of telling the FDA, if you go to this location, you will find these products, and it kind of gives them an idea of next time they come and audit you, what to expect when you are at that location. Your establishments or your manufacturing locations should register annually. And I gave you the US dollars, a little over $5,500. This changes annually. And usually there's a reduction for small businesses, but unfortunately not for registration and listing. So if we go to, oops, wrong one, sorry. I thought I had that figured out. There's a MDUFA, is something in the US where it lists user fees by the fiscal year of the FDA. So you can see here that the fiscal year for the FDA runs October to September. And for the application type, there's a column here, there's a standard fee and then the small business fee. And if you see up on the top, the annual establishment registration fee is, $5,672. So we gave you this link. So you can check when it comes time as to how much fees are, not only for establishment registration, but if you see a 510K here, you can see the standard fee is like $13,000 rather, and the small business fee is a little over $3,000. So it does pay, obviously, to be seen as a small business. Let me go back to the presentation.
So I want to let folks know that you have to qualify for a small business. It's easy. I mean, it's based on annual sales, and I forget what the cutoff is specifically, but there's a process you need to go through. So you need to think about that in advance. right? To be certified as a small business, you need to leave like 30 days in advance. For example, if you're submitting your 510K or you're submitting your registration, for them to process your information and give you that small business certification. It's a number they issue to you, and you'll use that then in your registration process, and that'll give you, or for your 510K, that'll give you you know, your reduced fee.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then when you register or register your location or list your medical devices, it's done electronically, and the system's called FURLS. Okay. So let's talk about registering your facility. So you should register your facility prior to placing the device into commercial distribution. And again, this kind of identifies where and what the FDA will audit. As you may know or may not know, FDA is responsible for the health and safety of, you know, the citizens of the U.S. So you'll see that theme as I kind of reference FDA, especially for post-market. So depending on the classification of the device, you know, class 3 FDA might have to audit you and, you know, approve your manufacturing processes prior to commercialization. For class 2, you might not have an audit. You know, it really depends on the type of device and the classification as far as, you know, what's required for that. Foreign establishments should register before, you know, bringing the products to the U.S. And you need to have the pre-market clearance. There's, you know, in my experience, I've had so many medical devices stuck at the border because they either weren't registered or they didn't have the pre-market clearance. And it's, you know, dealing with the border agents. It's always interesting. You just need to get them the information that they ask for. So here, you know, listing medical devices, you want to list them by name. And again, the importers, the import places use this information to kind of check off and make sure that, you know, the device is able to come into the US. So you have to, you know, make sure, let's see, where are we here? You want to submit the device listing prior, you know, to commercial distribution, and foreign manufacturers should submit the listing before bringing devices to the US. And the last slide here. So as you go through product development, say you're doing another revision of your device, we need to evaluate change, and, you know, the FURLS database needs to be updated as changes occur to your device. So some things like, you know, you change your manufacturing facility, that needs to be updated. If you are no longer offering a device, that also needs to be updated in FURLS. Let's see. So, and then again, the establishment registrations are based on the FDA fiscal year. And they require that you update your registration at the end of each calendar year. Any questions on registrations and listings? Okay.
There is a small question that I was just on the chat that says whether you could kindly clarify the process of obtaining the small business certification, maybe especially on timings, for instance.
So I think the FDA allows themselves 60 days for that process. It's generally, my experience has been, more recently, it takes about 30 days. Right. And the process is one where you have to provide documentation to demonstrate that you have not exceeded the limit in sales. And usually this is done through providing either tax documents attesting to the amount of sales that the company has received. It's a fairly easy process, but you need to fill out a form and have backup information to be able to support their
I think on the link that we
sales.
give you, if you would even, does it have a link for small business fees? It does right down here, small businesses. And it kind of goes through the guide. It has a link for the guidance here. Yeah, and here, Eric, your gross receipts of sales, 30
So
million.
that's a
or
pretty
less.
big number, right? 30
It
million.
is. Yeah.
So a lot of companies are going to fit into that. And again, it doesn't give you a reduction when it comes to registration, but it does give you a reduction when it comes to submitting a pre-market notification, a 510K application with the FDA. And it's pretty substantial. Differences between, if you're not a small business, it's 12,000 versus 3,100, right? So it's worth your time and effort if you're going that route to go through that process.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
But
Maybe
it's a good
related
question. You need to leave the time. You need to leave time to be able to do that, because the FDA is going to expect to have already received payment before they agree to review your submission.
A related question to this is how, once you get the small business certification, how long does it last? Does it need to be renewed at some point? Yeah.
Yes, I believe it's annually. It needs to be updated. So once you establish your identity, if you will, as a small business, it's easier the next year. You just need to renew and submit your documentation. You don't need to create yourself as a new identity, right? So once you're in the database as a small business on a yearly basis, and it's as Martha indicated, it's October 1st through September 30th is the cycle. Then you just need to resubmit your new tax documentation, and you'll get an updated small business number. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Maybe the last one of the questions that we have is whether the MDSAP audit routine can replace the FDA audit.
Yes, the FDA will accept an Mdsapp audit. Right, so these countries have all gotten together and agreed on the audit format and the type of information that needs to be reviewed. And once you have contracted or have signed into the Mdsapp, the FDA will accept that audit.
Yep, it really does save time, because otherwise you have all these foreign governments coming to to audit you, and you seem like that's all you do is do audits. So it's nice to knock a couple out. If you intend on going to all those markets, I mean, there's other requirements to go to those markets as well. But okay, so the next section, U.S. import requirements. I only did one slide on this. There's probably a lot more. I don't have a lot of experience on import, because where I worked, we had a separate group that dealt with import and export. But here's some thoughts. If you have a foreign manufacturer, you must designate a U.S. agent, and that's kind of like their touch point, their key person. And this person would, of course, register the establishment, do the device listing, and then do the medical device reports, or the MDRs, or adverse event reports to the FDA.
This is pretty similar to, like in Europe, a authorized representative, right? In other words, this is for companies that are outside the US, do not have a US presence, right? As far as the US agent. Right, so companies that want to register or whatnot, and they don't have a corporate entity in the U.S., they have to enlist a U.S. agent. Okay, to be able to import your products into the U.S. And to be the main correspondent for companies related to any interactions with the FDA. In other words, if you're in Europe and you have, have received, let's say, a 510K, and your US agent would be the entity that actually gets contacted by the FDA to say, hey, we want to set up an audit, or hey, we have questions about your products, or things of that nature.
And there's a website here too that's right. This is importing. It gives you a really good overview, and we'll be giving you all these links that are actually embedded in the presentation, so you can review that. Some of the basic regulatory requirements are, it's just kind of what we've kind of been talking about. You need to register establishment, you need to have your device listed, you need a quality system, you need a pre-market notification like a 510K number or something. There's special requirements for labeling, things that need to be on your device, or maybe even the device package, country of origin, where the manufacturer is located, expiration date, all sorts of things that are in labeling that if we look at section 801, it lists all the requirements that are needed for import. Let's see, that's the end of that section. I kind of went fast through it. Hopefully you're understood and you don't have too many questions, but if you have any, let me know.
There are a couple. There are a couple about the US agent. So one question is, are there any special qualifications to have a US agent, or who can be the US agent in this case? And another question that it's linked to that is, what happens if the medical device is not importable? For instance, a software service. Do they need to go through this import requirement process then?
So the question on the question on the software. So obviously you wouldn't necessarily need to import it. However, you would still need a US agent. That would be not necessarily, associated strictly with import requirements, but it would be associated with your registration and listing. So if you've got a software as a medical device that is classified as a medical device and has gone through review, you still need a US agent, right? If you don't have a US entity. Right, so you still need to, not from an import standpoint, but from a registration and listing standpoint, you would need to have a US agent assigned in that database. The first question on the qualifications, it really can be most anyone. There aren't stringent qualifications around it. However, you do need to be listed and reviewed and approved by the FDA in that FERLS system. Right, the electronic system. So for example, AlvaMed is a US agent, right? We have a US agent number, an established, US agent with the FDA, right? So we actually have an assigned number as an entity, and you would then use that in your registration and listing. So the qualifications are not strict, certainly, but you need to, you need to be able to, have the information that's required into the FDA's database.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the import requirements, especially for software, when they wrote these requirements way back when, it was a physical thing that came across the border. Nowadays, being able to download from the cloud, it's a little more gray area. But if you do have a software product, it should be listed. At least it should have a medical, quality management system associated with it, and you should have some kind of pre-market clearance. So either a 510K or some kind of maybe even a PMA. And on that software, there should be some labeling as well. So. Okay. Next section is on change assessment. In your quality management system, you should have a process, or a process to evaluate changes, because your medical device is going to go through a lot of changes, especially if it's software. All the software products I've ever worked with, there's always some kind of change going on. So these changes have to be assessed, right? And we need to evaluate them to see if they affect the regulatory filings. And medical device determination too. You might do something that causes your product not to become a medical device, or if it's not a medical device, it might turn into a medical device. But you still need to assess the change. And like we talked about before, some of the changes might affect the registration and listing, especially if you're changing the name or where it's manufactured. So I wanted to give you a definition of what changes are, what I think a change is. And of course, if you're intending on marketing globally, this definition and what needs to assess, will definitely change per country, per regulator. It just depends, which you'll get a lot from when you talk to our regulatory folks. I usually, lean on, does it affect form, fit, or function, and labeling? And we all know that labeling is more than just paper documents like the instructions for use. It can be marketing claims. It can be the actual sticker that goes on the label, or whether it's a physical sticker or a virtual sticker. So it's some things to think about as you are evaluating change. FDA, of course, has 2 guidances, which we use a lot, especially when dealing with change. So the first one is for medical device or hardware changes, and the second one is detailed just for software. So if your device contains both, you should go through both of these types of evaluations. And I gave you the links here for you. So as an example, and I'm not going to go through, I wish we would have time to go through an actual example, but for the first one that was listed, deciding on whether or not to submit a 510K for the change, you have this main flow chart that the FDA gives you, and hopefully you can see it. And it tells you, first of all, the first question is the change made with intent to significantly improve the safety or effectiveness? If it is, yes, you have to do a 510K. If not, is it a labeling change? There's a separate chart. Is it a change to technology, engineering, or performance? There's a separate chart. And even if there's a materials change, there's a separate chart.
So I just want to kind of tie this into your process, right? I want to tie this into kind of, your product development process, right? Because, you get your clearance or you get your approval from the FDA, and you start commercializing your product. You send it out. Invariably, you get feedback, right? You get feedback from your users out in the market, and they're like, well, this is great, but I need something that's, it's not long enough. I need a size of a catheter that's longer. Or, boy, it would be great if I had a diameter that was smaller. Or, it'd be great if you could add this extra function onto the console, right? So that I could measure temperature as well, right? All examples of kind of the product development process, right? That kind of goes on, right? You kind of develop a product, you get it out in the market, then you start iterating and you start changing and improving your product, right? This process is one where you need to evaluate those changes for their significance and whether they need to be submitted to the FDA or not. And the way most companies do this is they tie this into their product development SOP, right? Where they actually detail, here's what development, what design control process we use. Usually it's a subset, say for design changes, we do the following things. So as part of that, that's when this assessment gets done, right? It should be done during the development process or your modifications as they occur. And if they're minor, oftentimes this process is done while the change order is put through, right? From a documentation standpoint, when you put through, for example, a document change order or engineering change order that kind of says, okay, we're changing these documents and here's why. This change assessment that's the time for this to be completed. Okay.
Yep. Thanks for the clarification. Yeah, exactly. So there's a main chart which kind of points you to other charts. The second one's for labeling changes, and I'm not going to try to read this, but you can see how in depth some of these questions can be. And if you read a question and you don't really understand or you want more background, if we go to the guidance, let's see, if we go to the guidance for here, if we download, they will give you additional information as far as what is meant by the question. So I should have had this already queued up.
But this is a really important guidance document for people on the call, just because it'll give you examples, right? It'll walk you through a number of different examples and say, based on this, you would need to submit a 510K or a change to the 510K, or based on this, you put together documentation, right? So it's actually one of the better guidance document that the FDA has put out, and is one that I think the audience here should really become familiar with once they start marketing a product in the US.
Yep. So as an example, if is the change from a device labeled for single use to something that's reusable, the FDA gives you kind of hints or things to think about on how to answer that question. This document is also really good if you come to the end of the decision and it says, right here, documentation. It helps you to document your decision process.
A lot of people actually print out these flow charts when they actually put a documentation package together and say, well, I don't need to file. And we'll talk about a minute in what's called a letter to file or something of that nature. But what I've done, when I work with companies, is actually print this out, right? Mm-hmm. Go and highlight how you arrived at your decision not to file a 510K, right? And then put that into your regulatory file, right? Because this is one of the things that's going to come up during the inspections, right? When you do the MDSAP audit or you do the FDA audit, this is one aspect of the audit they're going to look at, is what products you have on the market, what has been reviewed and approved by the FDA, and what changes to the products have you made since you last submitted to the FDA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I would want to reiterate that this does come up in audits because they do, mm-hmm. especially certain changes, it can get the attention of the FDA, and you have a really good conversation with them regarding certain changes. So you can go through another flow chart as far as, if there's a technology or performance change, something similar to that, similar to material. You wouldn't think that changing material is a big thing, but it can be, especially if it has patient contact.
Right. And oftentimes, just a quick note on the material, right? In that oftentimes when you go through that flow chart, you don't need to file, but it'll ask you whether you've completed testing to verify that the new material does not raise new questions of safety or efficacy, right? So sometimes you can't just complete the flow chart and make your determination. Sometimes you need to do testing. For example, if it's new material, patient contacting, you may need to repeat biocompatibility testing in some manner before you can determine that there's no submission required for the FDA.
Yeah, so that's this box over here, if you can see it. Does the change significantly affect performance or biocompatibility? And the other one I wanted to highlight is there is one that has to do with risk. Yeah, does a risk assessment identify any new or significantly modified risks? So it kind of makes you go back to your risk assessment, which is also part of the quality system. That should be available for audits. The last one here is, oh, this is if you have an in vitro diagnostic device.
It's important to know if you're in the IVD market, right?
Mhm.
There are some different guidance here in this document for you to consider.
Yep. And then one of the last flowcharts I wanted to show is, change to the software device. And again, the guidance does have details. It looks like a pretty simple flow chart, but once you start looking through it, and if you read the guidance, it doesn't seem as easy as just a couple yes/no questions for that. But I mean, as software is becoming more and more significant, especially in medical devices, this is being used more and more and more. I mean, it was released in 2017, so relatively new, but still, we should pay attention to evaluate changes for software. And sometimes if you talk to software developers, they think it's an insignificant change, but as you start really looking at it, it might be a significant change or something that you would have to file a new 510K. So then what to do if the decision is to document, like Eric said previously, create a letter to file. This documents your decision-making process. You have justifications in there and rationale as to why you made that decision. And it's really important to get into the detail because, a couple of years from now, when you're trying to look back on why we made this change, or what was our decision as far as materials changes, it's important to be able to look back at that detail and really understand and be able to interpret what was done previous and why you weren't going to submit a 510K. And like Eric said, this should be part of the regulatory file.
Yeah, so documentation, I mean, when you look at documentation and letter to file, right? Here's what I would expect as a manufacturer that you would do, right? You'd put together a brief summary of what the change was, right? Why you were making the change, what exactly changed with the product, the labeling, things of that nature, right? And then I would, suggest that you print out the appropriate chart from the FDA guidance document, highlight your decision making, and then summarize your rationale on why you did not submit a new submission to the FDA, right? So that way you've got a nice little package of information, because invariably down the road, in a number of different ways, people may be looking for that. And think about 2 or 3 years down the road, the FDA shows up, right? And they're like, well, what happened with this change? And that might have been 3 or 4 changes ago, right? So having that documented, I think, is really important from an FDA standpoint. It's also a good business rationale, a good business decision, because as my sense is a lot of the people on the call today are probably smaller companies. And oftentimes, if you're a small company, you're raising money, you're looking to be acquired, right? Those business partners will often do due diligence, right? And this would be kind of down the level of due diligence that shows that you've got a good, regulatory assessment that's been completed.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so there's usually 2 decisions, documentation, which we just went through, and then file a 510K. So, okay, so let's say we fell on to file a 510K. So there are 3 different types, whether you know that or not. You know, traditional, abbreviated, and special. Traditional is the most common, contains the most information. Abbreviated is something where you can reference voluntary standards, voluntary consensus standards. And let me go back to recognized consensus standards. Here's a database. The FDA will let you know if it's if they recognize a standard or not. So if we put something in here like 60601 and do a search, the FDA will tell you everything. It's quite a bit because it's a big standard with a lot of subparts. You know, what they recognize. So if they recognize it, you should probably be using it in your testing. Let's see, abbreviated. I've only done one in my career. It's not that common.
I've only done a couple myself. It's sometimes it's kind of fallen out of favor, if you will. Usually you do a traditional or a special.
Yeah, and you know, when I did the abbreviated 510K, the FDA asked all the questions for a traditional 510K. So, you know, usually if people say they want to do an abbreviated, I always kind of instruct them, well, we might as well be doing a traditional, or at least, you know, have that information in your back pocket for when the FDA asks questions. And then the last one there, a special 510K, that is done when you make a change to your own device going forward. It's your manufacturer's own legally marketed device that already has a 510K clearance. It's smaller. It's not a lot of information, less information than a traditional. And what else was I going to say about it? Oh, the review time for a special is usually about 30 days with the FDA, and traditional it's 90 days. So because the special doesn't contain a lot of information and you are kind of referencing your own product, I think the FDA can go through that pretty fast. And then there's a guidance, of course. I went to file a special 510K, and this is just brand new, 3 years old, but brand new. And of course, this is also in a guidance with explanation by question or by step. So you see, you can either, you know, the green is it's appropriate, or red it's not appropriate. Any questions on change assessment?
Yes, we do have a couple. So one is asking whether there is a guidance for major modifications of class 1 devices specifically, like for instance, a modification related to labeling.
I
do not believe so. And I'm not sure what the you know, whoever's asking the question in what regards that is, because if you've got a kind of like a class 1, right, device, and I'm assuming they're talking about it being an exempt device in that no submission was required to be sent to the FDA. The question there then really would be to, well, do you now change your classification where, or your definition where you do need to file? And whoever asked that question, you can email us and whatever, we'll give you a little bit more background. But what I would say to them is that if you're changing your labeling and it's around intended use, for example, then you need to go back and take a look at the original classification and see if you now are required to file a 510K. Okay, this guidance document may be of some assistance to you, but it's a little bit different.
Yeah, thanks. The second question is, what happens if you think you do not need to file some of the changes, but afterwards FDA considers that you should have filed them?
I'll go first. I don't know what your
Yeah.
experience is, Martha, but I'll tell
Yep.
you what my experience is. It's a very good question. I saw that come across, and it's a very, very good question. As the manufacturer, it's your responsibility to make that assessment, right? My experience has been that if the FDA disagrees with your decision, they will make you file a 510K. Okay, so the big difference here has been that if you do not have procedures in place to make that assessment. In other words, you have an SOP in place in your quality management system that indicates, here's what you do when you make a product change. Here's the decision process that you follow. And you followed that process and decided that you didn't need the file. The FDA knocks on your door, they come in, they take a look and say, no, you misinterpreted your change, that needs to be filed. Generally, what'll happen is that'll show up as a finding, an audit finding, and they'll require you to submit that 510K. Okay. If, however, on the other hand, you do not do the documentation, you just make all these changes to your 510K, never document them, and the FDA comes in, they have the option to stop distribution of your product and give you a warning letter, and stop distribution and wait for your 510K to get cleared. Okay, so it's important that you document it. That's my experience. I'm not sure if you have anything else, Martha.
I just have one extra experience. There's sometimes when you're on, you're developing your product, and you're relying on your regulatory person to help through the change assessment, and you go through little change, and a couple of years down the line, you kind of look back, and the product that you have now is completely different than what the 510K was cleared for. There's sometimes I would file something that I like to call like a catch-up 510K, where you kind of tell the FDA, these are all the changes that we've gone through over the past, you might not want to say a couple years, but these are all the changes that have happened to the product. And we're submitting this 510K to kind of let the FDA know that, we went through these changes. And
yeah, so it's a sum of the changes, right? You can
Some
look
of
at
the
them
changes,
individually,
yep.
And then you have 5 letters to file. And now you got to look at all of them together and say, maybe all together I should go ahead and submit a 510K. So those are some considerations.
Any other questions?
Not that I see so far. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go through the last section. So this is the post-market safety monitoring, and a lot of these terms you've heard us refer to as we've been talking. So part of your quality management system is complaint files. This is when you get feedback from the users. There might be positive feedback, it might be negative feedback. Your complaint files should be reviewed for potentially reportable events. And if you go global and it's just not US, the definition of a potentially reportable event kind of changes. Have little nits in there.
But it's important to note, you should have procedures in place in your quality management system that define a complaint handling system and the requirements to report either vigilance reporting in the EU or MDR reporting in the US.
And if, as you go through your development life cycle too, you want to review the complaints that are coming in, for potential design changes or extra features or, things like that. Sometimes those are kind of hidden or, they're evident in your complaint files. Okay, so adverse event reporting, the US calls that MDR, medical device reporting. I know for Europe, they have the new regulation called MDR, so it can get a little confusing. So under the adverse event reports in the US, if there's a significant public health, you want to report that to the FDA as soon as possible. They say 5 working days. You might not need or have the entire story of what happened out in the field, but you want to get that report in to the FDA as soon as possible, because again, you know, FDA is responsible for the health and safety. If you get a report of a death, it might not be the device's fault. It just might be like a user error, but FDA still wants to know about that. A serious injury is 30 days, and if the device fails to perform its intended purpose is 30 days. If you are under an IDE, investigational device exemption, and you have an adverse event, you still need to report that as well. And I think they, as it says here, it's 10 days after you receive notice of the event. I gave you two links down here. How to report medical device problems, and anybody can report a medical device problem. It's not only a manufacturer, a user, a hospital, a distributor, almost anybody. Well, anybody could report an MDR to the FDA, and this gives you a really good overview. And look, it even has a mobile app on how to report medical device problems. And then this top link on here is a specific for manufacturers, and it's a really old document, but it's really good, and it kind of tells you how to report. Again, probably the same information that's on the FDA website for that. Another part of the post-market safety monitoring is the corrections and removals, which kind of means either you're going to go out in the field and correct something, or you're going to physically remove the product from the field. I usually refer to this as a recall. So it kind of means that the devices are in the field, or it has been commercialized, right? Because it's post-market. They have an unacceptable effect on the health and safety of the public, and you need to fix it. You know, some of these might be more severe than others. You know, some actions might be to alert the users. Like I said, you might want to remove them from the field. You might want to go out and fix the field. You might want to exchange, you know, like the identified bad product for good product. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can mitigate the risk to the field through the corrections and removal process. Anything to add, Eric, for that one?
I think that, yeah, I think that
Okay.
covers it. Everyone, you know, again, it's procedures. You need to have procedures in place, and the FDA, you know, there's a classification process on class 1, class 2, class 3 type of recalls, right? From most urgent, where, you know, you have to take stringent action and report it to the FDA to, you know, it's kind of minor. Labeling is probably the biggest reason for recalls for, you know, for medical devices and other devices, you know, IVDs and software.
Yep. And then I'm going to give you, here's some of the databases that are available. And this, you know, this might even help you when you're developing your product, just to be aware of if you have similar products that are out in the field and you want to, you know, maybe there's a inherent problem or inherent risk to see what was reported. There's something called the MAUDE database, and this is where all of the AERs are provided to the public. And you can go in there and you can, you know, type in a manufacturer and find out all the AERs that they have reported to the FDA. The second one here is recalls, so you can see the recall database. And then finally, the one on the right, Eric was talking about warning letters. So that's when the FDA has become knowledgeable of an issue, and they're going to warn you of the manufacturer of either potential action or, kind of let the public know an event happened and you should be aware, sort of. So if we go to, and real quick, I'm just going to go to the MAUDE database. It's very similar to what the screenshot showed. Same thing with recalls. You can search the recalls. And then this final one here, warning letters. You can subscribe to email updates. And this is warning letters on, I think when I get email updates, it's on everything, tobacco, food, medical devices, and some of them can be pretty interesting. Anything to follow up with that, Eric? I don't know if I did a good job on that one.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. And then at the end of the presentations, here's some links that I wanted you to be aware of. If you're looking for, like I referenced, section 801, you can go to this website, type in 801, and it'll give you the Code of Federal Regulations, and then our contact information down here. Okay. Oh, we went just a little bit over, but not too bad. Are there any last words, Eric, or are there any
final questions from the group? Yeah.
There is one question that asked, maybe that can be answered quickly, also being mindful of everybody's time. How does the FDA filters false adverse reports?
So I saw that come across. So there's different sources of adverse event reports, right? From a manufacturer, right? There's no reason that we should be concerned that folks are, if you're reporting for your company to the FDA database, I assume that, those are truthful. When it comes to the other, right, healthcare providers and whatnot, I do not believe the FDA filters at all, right, whether there's false reports or not. And in all honesty, I don't think the FDA reviews each adverse event report. What they're looking for, in all honesty, is the severity of the event and the number of events, right? So as a manufacturer, when you get into some of these reporting requirements, you have to start trending, right? Like, how many reports have you had for your MDR reports? Are they on the same product? So the FDA, given their resources, are not going to be reviewing each report. They're going to triage them and look for those reports that are of high severity, and that the number of reports is large, right? So I'd be more concerned with that kind of aspect of it as opposed to screening inaccurate reports. The only place that would be an inaccurate report would come in from probably a healthcare provider, honestly, most healthcare providers don't have time, right? This is, when it comes to adverse event reporting, from the healthcare side, it is vastly underutilized, right? It's not all that common for a hospital or a doctor or someone to report a specific event. So they do occur because there is concerns about liability and things of that nature if there was a device problem. But yeah, so that's my thoughts on that.
Just one last thing, if you're doing complaint trending, I think that's a requirement for the EU to do complaint, and it just makes good sense from a business standpoint, and a good quality management system should have some kind of trending, especially for complaints.
I think that's it. Thanks, everyone. I saw a couple of questions come across. We'll have the attendee list. We'll send out the slides to everyone so they have that, and you'll have our information. Feel free to send over questions that you may have going forward.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Martha.
And everyone.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.